Title of my talk is Towards a Placeful University, Places and Spaces in and outside of the university. And the project is implemented in the framework of Varlam-Cherkesishvili Center for Interdisciplinary Studies. And just a couple words, who is this person? Varlam-Cherkesishvili was a 19th century famous Georgian anarchist, who also was a paradoxical figure, because as you know, anarchists normally defy the existence of the state and normative foundations of the state, so to say. And the Cherkesishvili later, at the end of 19th century, joined Georgia's national liberation movement. And so this also even caused a crack in his relationship with other anarchists at the beginning of the First World War. So our center bears his name, and the main directions of our research, there are three clusters: interdisciplinary educational studies, interdisciplinary post-colonial studies, and political and legal philosophy. And this project, which I'm speaking about, is under the framework, so to say, of interdisciplinary educational studies. That is a short introduction of my project. And now let's directly begin. And before speaking about my project, I want to outline an understanding about places and spaces, which underlies my project and my research. And this understanding and these propositions come from various authors, whom I will indicate at the end. So these are ideas, not originally my ideas, but they came down from reading and absorbing the ideas of these authors. The first one is that the place is not a mere physical setting. When we see some place, for example, this is a landscape of a seascape of Black Sea at my hometown, Poti, we see a physical setting. But places are also centers of meaning for some persons. This, for example, for schoolboys or schoolgirls, this can be a gathering place after a school, or for some families, this can be a strolling place in the evening. So places are not just physical settings where some trees are grown, or there are some kind of walls and structures, but they are centers of meaning. We invest them with meanings. They are meaningful places. So this is one first and very important proposition, so to say. And there is also another proposition attached to this, another thesis, that place comes before space. So it might sound a little bit paradoxical, but this the roots of this thought might be also seen in ancient times, but in 20th century, I think this line of thought was pushed forward by German philosopher Martin Heidegger. During this lecture, I do not intend to go deeply in the complexities of his thought, but when we say that place comes before space, in this case, I mean that we are always place-bounded. We always find ourselves at some place. And then we orient ourselves within space. So it is basically speaking and positing ontological priority of place. And this kind of thought also is visible in the writings of Australian philosopher Jeff Malpass. But place and space are never separate. So when we say that place comes before space, we don't make some opposition between place and space as some authors make. For example, Ifut, humanistic geographer, he opposed these two concepts, but within this approach, we don't oppose these notions. So we see place and space as inextricably entwined and requiring each other, but just positing the ontological priority of place. Places, when we speak about the relationship between places and spaces, we have this interesting notion that places contain spaces. For example, university as a place where, for example, I'm working or I am studying, it contains some spaces where we walk, where, for example, students make their exhibitions. This is These are photos from my university, East European University, and the students of architecture specialties, they made their exhibition. So university as a place contains space, and this is a space which can be, transcended, moved, and humans interact within these places. So places and spaces have dynamic relationships. And also, contrary, spaces contain places. For example, this is Tbilisi State University, one of the main campuses at Tavadze Avenue in Tbilisi, and we see the urban setting, and it contains a place as one attachment. So it depends on a viewpoint how we see this. We can say that space contains place from some perspective, and from some perspective also places contain within themselves spaces. And we arrive at the following conclusion, that places and spaces mutually define and hold each other. There is always a subtle and dynamic relationship, as I have said, and I think it is not of methodological value singling them out or opposing them each other. I think the better view which Malpass advances is holding them together, always in complexity, and trying to understand these complex relationships which exist between them, I mean place and space. Another point, so this was one first major point, so to say. Another one is that place is not a static givenness. So place is not something which holds still. Places have their own pulse, so to say. David Simon, another humanistic and phenomenological geographer, developed also the notion of place palette, and he referred to the movements of bodies, embodied selves through spaces. But I'm also using this notion pulse of place, meaning that it accelerates sometimes and decelerates sometimes. We see many people sometimes coming together at some place, and places bustling with people is active, and then place is depopulated, and so to say it rests. For example, you see here the Tbilisoba festival. It is annual festival which Tbilisi as a city makes every year in autumn. So you see these movements and these happenings which go on at some place, and this is a Lefta-heavy canyon in the very center of Tbilisi town, where is a waterfall. So we can say therefore that place is also a process. Place is an event. So it is not something which is static, but it's event, it is dynamic. And so this approach, which I adhere, says that we should consider place as something, as a happening. So place is not something as a mere spot in abstract geometrical space. Okay, and then comes another important notion, very important one, I dare to say. This is a notion of place world. So I have encountered this notion in philosopher Edward Casey, who has written many important books about places. Perhaps this notion is used by other authors, but I have prominently, this notion prominently figures in Edward Casey's work. And what is the place world? The definition you see. So this is a totality of places in which we dwell, which we visit, move between. So this is what constitutes our environment. And of course, we as socialized selves form our identity in our environment. So our environment shapes our identity. And if we are always place bounded, this means that there is a complex and very important relationship between place world and our identity, which is, of course, very difficult perhaps to capture empirically, but we can say this in a philosophical level, that we are always emplaced in our place world. And be it, for example, the study room, or be it outside when we see some landscape and we go into our thoughts and have some conclusions and so on. And when we speak about place worlds, we have to say that there are some processes which secure our place worlds, which strengthen these place worlds. For example, here you see a traditional Alilo celebration when on 7th January, when Georgian Orthodox Church celebrates Christmas, they go in a procession in the streets. So they unite, and this creates some kind of spirit of belonging, of togetherness. And many other examples can be shown here. I have just shown mostly, I think almost exclusively, the pictures I have taken in this presentation. So this is from this year, 2023. So there are processes which actually help us to feel more attached to our place world and to feel included. But unfortunately, there are also processes which undermine our place world, which are unpleasant processes. This is flooding which occurred in Tbilisi in 2015 and cost many lives, and it disrupted the place worlds of many people. And also when we see nowadays terrible and brutal war unfolded by Russia in Ukraine, this is also a process which not only undermines, but actually destroys place worlds of thousands of persons. So place worlds happenings, they are subjects of processes which actually sometimes undermine them and sometimes strengthen them, right? Sometimes undermines them physically, like objectively destroying it, and sometimes there are processes which, if they are integrative enough, they include larger portions or different groups of the people and strengthen their belongings to their respective life worlds. Therefore, we can say also, and moving slowly to the description of my project, that place is also the sort of thing where unexpected encounters and discoveries happen. Imagine, for example, you visit your village, or you're just strolling in your neighborhood and seeing the old friend of yours, or former classmate, or just person whom you know or knew some years ago. So places are always full of potentialities, and this is also these kind of encounters include not only animated, not only humans, but also inanimated objects. For example, this was my encounter when I visited a district, a neighborhood in Tbilisi where mostly car repair shops are located, and it is a very busy district, not to say very clean, but I found this kind of Soviet time fresco, but it brought a completely different aesthetical component into that place, and I was astonished. So when we say that there are encounters, the places enable some kind of encounters, we mean encounters also to objects, to happenings in our life. And of course, in a sense, it's quite very subjective. And this can also be some kind of stimulus to think about something metaphysical, perhaps. So one thing, on the one hand, we say that places enable encounters with different cultures, persons belonging to different cultures, and to strangers, to say it in a phenomenological sense, like philosopher Bernhard Waldenfels uses it. But they also enable us to find something new, to discover something, and also to discover something in ourselves. So when we have this contact with others, with other objects and other persons, we, I think, constantly rediscover ourselves, be it intentionally or not intentionally, right? So there is always underlying processes going in our consciousness, because it is always place-bounded, right? Then now I move to discuss the project, Places and Spaces in and Outside of the University. So this project has emerged that it has several aims. That it has emerged because when I began this project, it was open-ended. Even now it is still open-ended project. I don't have the clear-cut view of predefined goals on how I'm going to measure them, to admit it frankly. but some of the aims crystallized, and I am working, also trying to work in this direction to achieve these aims as far as they are possible, taking into consideration the academic life, the opportunities and constraints on academic life. So one of the main aims is to develop the sense of place within participants of the project and care for places. The second is to promote deeper realization of the role of places in university community. So what is university? What kind of place is university? What kind of processes threaten this place, and what kind of processes strengthen this place? To promote the discussions on these subjects is also one part, I think, of this project. And also to create places and spaces within university, which will enable individuals to realize themselves, to realize their potentialities. And I will try to show how I am trying to achieve these goals. Well, there are several underlying beliefs for this project. The first, first of all, I have to say that the belief is that I do believe that the deepening of interpersonal relationships and the creation of an atmosphere where there is a personal trust. Paul Gibbs uses the notion existential trust and empathetic trust to develop this kind of trust between academic community and students, and to share our experience, not only as academics and professionals, but as humans, as fathers or mothers or siblings, as human beings with our own vulnerabilities. This is no less important, or I think equally important. I am not weighing it, but it is very much as important for me as giving certified knowledge to students and to achieve some measurable learning outcomes. In contemporary Georgian education, and I'm pretty sure also in elsewhere else, in quality assurance systems, there is very much talking about measuring learning outcomes, and sometimes it goes at the level even of hysteria or fetishizing this process. I'm not implying that we should completely abandon the idea of measuring learning outcomes, but the idea that I think the higher education has a risk, at least in Georgia, and that's my subjective opinion, if we equate the goal of higher education to creation or forming the skills and the measurable outcomes, I think this can cause and is causing massive problems within the understanding of what is education at all. And this is not, as I have seen, it's a very widespread idea, at least in some direction or of scholars in English-speaking world also. There are numerous edited volumes and published books where authors emphasize the dangers which this kind of absolutization of instrumental rationality poses to the idea of education. So underlying belief is that we have to develop the alternative notion of education, which at least will try to balance these shortcomings or threats which are coming from these tendencies of instrumentalization, of measuring, of reducing the higher education to expectations of becoming hired at the labor market. I have titled also this research as action research. And in this, I have to thank Professor David Greenwood from Cornell University, because I had many talks with him, and I read a book of his with Morten Levin about action research. And I think one of the main aims also of this research, action research, is not only to gather some kind of scientific or scholarly data, but also to promote more activity in students, to increase their participation in the university community. So that's why I call it action research. And so when I began it, at first it was a kind of purely perhaps or largely ethnographic and anthropological project driven by an anthropological and ethnographic curiosity. Because in my dissertation, I worked on philosophical geography and tried to incorporate some empirical elements. It is other question how successful I was, but this kind of curiosity always moved me. So the first question was to study place worlds of international students of our university. And at our healthcare faculty, we have many students from India. And I was interested what are the elements of our or what are the elements of place worlds of our Indian students? For example, where do they go to eat? Where do they go to rest? What are the places where they find themselves safe when they feel they are not safe? What are their place experiences, so to say? And we began meetings, and I talked with them. And I also intend to record with them interviews. So this was the first layer, so to say, of this project, which intended to study the place worlds of international students. Because for many Georgians, for average Georgians, I will dare this to say, India is just one entity, and there is no appreciation of this difference from students from Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu or Uttar Pradesh or Odisha, or different states. They are just Indians. And my aim was to make a research or attempt to try to show the result I intend to be the product, to show to Georgian audiences that these emplaced selves of Indian students come also from different places which are richly textured, which have different cultural backgrounds, that beyond their, at the first glance, homogeneity, there is richly textured differences and experiences, and their life worlds are deeply connected with their place worlds. So this was the first layer of my project. And the second, which was immediately attached to this, I have noticed that in Georgia, there is this kind of a tendency that international and Georgian students sometimes form the parallel worlds, and I wanted to promote more intercultural dialogue between them at their level, peer-to-peer level, enable them to encounter themselves, engage into the dialogue, and to discuss questions. So this is also second layer, so to say, of my project. And the third one, I think, is the third point finishes the shape which the project has at current stage. It is to realize the principles of ontological education through three activities. The first is place creation. The second is place discovery or place exploration, I call it. And the third is place caring. And I will explain also what I mean in all these three components. But before exploring these three components, I need to say some words about ontological education. What kind of education is this? Largely, I have relied in this regard on paper of Dahl, Alba, and Barnacle, and ideas of Paul Gibbs. So ontological education is a kind of education which is an alternative to established, as I have already mentioned, this neoliberal paradigm of measuring higher education and learning outcomes. And it ontological education intends to integrate different aspects of a personhood, like Alba and Barnett mentioned, knowing, acting, and being. So it intends, as I interpret it, to penetrate, to say, these different dimensions and to incorporate different elements into higher education rather than only building some kind of skills and instrumentality. And so also Gibbs underlines the importance of this existential trust, the personal connection, which is between tutor and students, and which means to expose our vulnerabilities as humans and trying to explore our shared humanity. So basically, this is roughly the idea of ontological education, which I captured from these authors. There might be another conceptions also which supplement these or pose alternative views, but these are ones which I have taken as a thread for my project. And first point, I will show it again. So we said place creation, place discovery, and place caring. So I was thinking that how can I speak to the students about places if I do not attempt at the first thing to create a place for them. So I tried to begin this kind of experiment. We began weekly informal meetings at my room. We have a board and we have also a tea table. So it's a kind of a ritual for us, not always, but frequently, to drink tea. And there is a board also. On the board, there are always the names of students who are active in the project. And now they have, I have changed my board. The board has changed, so there are many more students, but some of them, the names are still visible here. And at other places, we have the map of Georgia, because mostly we speak about places and spaces, and we also have map of India. And here now you have on the right pane written sacred places of India, which one student told us, and another on the left pane you see the sacred places we thought were most important in Georgia. And so we engage in this kind of activities and always try to visualize the topics we are speaking about. And this is also our small table, always full of some books, and I tried to create some kind of atmosphere, as much cozy as possible, according to my understanding. And these are photos of our weekly meetings. Moving to a more practical side. So at first I noticed that I was speaking too much. So I gathered students, but mostly I was the person who was talking, and I thought it wasn't so good. And then I had the idea that we rotate who is the chair, so to say, of meetings. And if a student wishes to become a chair, he or she tells me and then chooses any topic he or she wants to discuss. And we are sometimes discussing, for example, movies, sometimes discussing literature, sometimes speaking about mental stress, sometimes speaking about just everything, just quickly changing the topics. And it creates kind of a different atmosphere for us. And these are also these photos from meetings. So I try to make this as a kind of an event, as a happening. So what is this, how I connect this philosophical notion? So in these times when we meet, actually the pulse of my study room accelerates and the event is happening. And many of the students do not know each other before meeting. So when they meet afterwards at the universities, they are already not strangers, they have encountered each other. So a place happens, this place happens them to communicate, to exchange their ideas, and the students involved there try to understand each other because they belong to different cultures also. Then what do I have also at a more how to say research level? I have outlined formally, or perhaps informally, two levels of participation. No, informally. One level of participation is when student just comes and joins the event and then leaves, and he or she doesn't take any responsibility to write something. But some of them volunteer to write diaries. And so this is more active level of participation. And I ask them to write diaries, for example, 10 days diaries or 2 weeks diaries when being in India, in the case of Indian students, and then when being in Georgia. And for Georgian students, I ask them to write diaries about different periods of their student time, perhaps during holidays or during study time. So I am trying to make an autoethnography, and this is what we are going afterwards, after some years, because we are going slowly, to publish as a bilingual edition in Georgian and English, in order to show our audiences students' perspective of how they experience places and spaces. So each diary will be accompanied by an introduction of a student. A student can stay anonymous, and then will come out to ethnographical part where he or she will describe experiences of places and spaces where he or she moved. We also have additional projects which called photo stories. We have chosen several topics, for example, my university, or just food, or celebration vibes. There might be indefinite number of projects, and students take 10 or 15 photos about these projects, and they make comments like 2 or up to 5 perhaps sentences, and then they tell a story about it. And it is possible also to share, everything which we do in this, also diary writing and photo stories. If there is a wish from students, we share this information, of course, after student consents. And this also enables another level of discussion and exploration of new nuances of places, because when student, for example, makes a story about European Tbilisi, international student, this can force to think me again about aspects of Tbilisi which I see European, for example, or to see a place with a different eye. But anyway, these are these kind of trends which we make. And also, as I told you, we are intending to publishing these diaries in order to show these in-place selves of students. Okay. I also use one method which I call somewhat voluntarily spatial interventions. These are trips, so to say, which we organize. For example, this is a trip in Sololaki, in historical Tbilisi district, where I try to show to students places which are not normally touristic destinations, which are there are some kind of entrances which were painted in the 19th century, or some buildings which are not primary touristic destinations, but are nevertheless very much interesting. And we also had different kind of trips, just to see Tbilisi at New Year's Eve, and we just gathered and explored the area and this New Year village, so to say. Or we went to the Georgian restaurant and tasted. I asked them before, because we frequently speak about cuisine, and they have not tasted some kind of special Georgian food, and we ordered this one and they tasted. So we also incorporate these kind of elements in these special interventions. This is also old Tbilisi district, places which we saw. And this also is one of the tours, the second tour. Basically, I have organized 2 tours. And now I am going to organize a tour to Mtskheta. It is the ancient capital of Georgia and quite very close to Tbilisi. And just waiting for students to gather to have time after Easter holidays. This kind of interventions is not only that I am taking students. This time I went to students' hostel by their invitation and saw the environment where they lived, and also tasted very spicy chicken biryani. So I tried as far as my schedule enables me to see where they move and live, and to experience this at least at some degree. And this is me in their hostel. And also to participate in some cultural events. This was an event which was held in Tbilisi, dedicated to King Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaji of Maharashtra, the great king of Maharashtra state in 17th century. Perhaps I'm not making a mistake. It was a very great king, made a great naval fleet in India, and I was delighted to be invited at the event. And I also saw other students from other Georgian universities, Indian students, gathering and making commemoration and dances and reciting poems and so on in memory of the king. In addition to this, and slowly I'm going to the end, one of the components was fostering intercultural communication. And because students are coming every year at our university from India, I thought that it would be a good idea to create some digital tools to help them to understand and main aspects, or to get acknowledged the main aspects of Georgian culture. So our university uses Microsoft Teams, and I have created a group, Discover Georgia, where with the help of kind help of healthcare faculty, every student of healthcare faculty was added, and I have created different folders like architecture, cuisine, dance, history, movies. You see the titles of the folders, and try to add, of course, it's a subjective point, but important links or books or other information in every folder for students to explore. For example, here we see the folder cuisine, and there are links to Wikipedia or YouTube videos showing them typical Georgian foods or the things which are most valued in Georgia, or even the book here you see one is uploaded. Or, for example, about Georgian literature, here you see some works of Georgian authors which are available in English. They are uploaded here with also accompanying Wikipedia links for them to see who these authors are. Well, they can also explore this themselves, but this is an attempt to create a resource in which everything is together gathered for them, and we can also expand these, add other sources. And I'm working on the directions to create a similar Discover India digital space where students can themselves present ideas of information about India. So now the most important part, I think, but which goes at the end, but that's why it is important. So I'm very much indebted to these authors, which you see now at the screen, and I think my ideas are just more or less weak recapitulations of the ideas of these persons. So when I read these books and I received their insights, the question which always was in my mind was, how can I, so to say, translate these ideas into praxis of higher educational setting? How can I put this into praxis? And of course, perhaps it is a different kind, but I think that theory is always practical. And what comes into my mind is, I think, the famous conversation between Foucault and Deleuze, if I don't miss it. Theory and practice are very much connected, and practice is a continuation of a theory. So I want to acknowledge, and I'm very grateful for these authors providing these ideas. And plans for the future, what kind of plans do I have? The first, which was difficult, to try to bring Georgian and Indian students, because, the project is a small scale at the current stage. There are perhaps up to 25 students involved, but sometimes I have 5, 6, 7, or 8. Some of them are coming this week, but some of them are not coming another week. So this changes. And I want to pay more attention to intercultural communication and try to involve more students and to expand project slowly. And also increase student involvement. What do I mean in this? Not the numbers, but to give them stimulus to offer their ideas, to make something which they propose and not me, in order to them to feel that they can create and play with some ideas, and also help them in order for them to fulfill these ideas, if it is possible within our resources. So one of the main tasks of action research, as I have understood this, is to encourage them to be more active, and not only encourage, but to help them to perform their ideas into the reality. Then also I intend to invite my colleagues at at our meetings. For example, it is frequently me and students but we also once had a practice when my colleague joined. So I want to make it intentionally to invite, for example, PhD students, and it will be nice when PhD student talks with BA students, or another professor from another department. And I want to expand project also in this direction to enable students to expose in a good meaning, to expose them with each other, to different academics, different students, and to try to move into this direction, and also to popularize the project, to share the ideas. And again, thank you, Anatoly, because by sharing, I can hear some ideas, which some might be criticizing, or there might be some suggestions, and we can improve this and move forward and make a university, I think, a better place, not a place which is already stressful, especially if we take into the consideration so many demands, especially in Western countries, of publish or perish principle, to break this spell and to create places which truly will enable communication between the persons, and also trying to cooperate with international partners if some other researchers or scholars are interested in some way, which I don't envisage now, to make something experimental or exchange ideas. I will be open in this regard. So this was all about my presentation. Thank you for attention. These are cups which several of students leave in my bookshelf, so to say, and they are always here. And I tried by offering them this possibility to create this place boundedness. So the student always knows that he or she has his own cup and just takes it and drinks a cup of tea and speaks about something. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Giorgi. It's a thought-stimulating presentation. For me, it was a great example of how to connect theory and praxis, create praxis, as you emphasize, and how to kind of create better synergy between research and education. And this is something to really think about, because when you talk about philosophy, we enjoy philosophy, we like philosophy. Philosophy gives us a lot of great ideas, but at the same time, how to make these types of bridges between, some abstract notions, ideas, and very practical, concrete steps in education, in teaching and learning. That's something that requires a lot of that type of commitment that you have toward research in this particular area, and there's a very thought-stimulating. So thanks a lot. I can see messages coming from different places, Phnom Penh and Montreal in Canada, and Erzurum in Turkey, and I know that there are guests coming from India. One of my former PhD students who is from India, and from China and Hong Kong, and from Ukraine. So in general, that's we may have a conversation. I can see a comment from my colleague, Professor Chu Min, who Min, would you like to read your question, or would you like me to do that?
Sure. So thank you for your interesting talk, Professor Giorgi Tavadze. I was wondering whether you consider how neuroscience is related to your work. For example, like the human brain's distributed bit link storage, a stimuli in the cerebral cortex memory via hippocampus, also ideas of spreading the activation and mirror neurons. And then secondly, have you considered how Jean Leib's theory of legitimate peripheral participation regarding how communities emerge and grow is related to your work?
Now, thank you for your interesting question. To say frankly, not, because this is not my specialty, but I think it's very interesting. I am recalling now that recently we were speaking with my students. I think one of them is present here, Gauravi from India. We were speaking about neurosurgery and neuroscience, and one another student was interested also in this psychology student. But as for me, no, I was not thinking about this, but I will think definitely about this direction too. And if you kindly send me the literature or indicate in what direction can I move, I will be very grateful.
Yeah, so let me just say a little bit then. So the human brain doesn't store like memories in one place. It takes like different aspects of like let's take space. So when let's say we're in a classroom, we're learning like math, we're encoding not just like the mathematical symbols and ideas, but also the people around us, the location, the smells, the feelings, emotions. And so I think that's connected to your sense of space, right? And then so it's also connected to how people see each other. It's not simply the ideas we're focused on, it's actually everything around us. And so people might focus on different aspects at different times. So spreading activation is the idea that like when you ask someone, let's say a mathematics question, it activates not just the math, but also everything around like what you've learned at that time. So let's say you learned like an equation in a particular classroom, but also comes with like the temperature, also with like the people around you, like the physical objects in the room, but also your emotions, so like what's happening that day. So I think that might be interesting to you. And then mirror neurons about how we focus on not just what we see, but also how we connect to other people. So we actually try to reciprocate what other people are doing. So when I'm looking at you now, instinctively, I might try to like sort of do something similar to you're doing. So you have your, before you had your hand in your mouth, now you're drinking something. So just like seeing you do these things, like I might feel slightly more thirsty. There's these mirror neurons that affect how we behave and basically make us more similar to people around us by just observing them. And then Jean Levy's legitimate peripheral participation is about communities. So initially, when people become part of a community, let's say your classroom, your students walk in, they don't know you, but over time, you become more of a community. And you're engaging them, not just in your classroom, but also outside in other shared spaces. And you're trying to enter your student spaces as well, right? About going to your dormitories, eating their foods. So legitimate peripheral participation is about legitimacy, right? So things that you're doing, even though you don't each other well, you're doing things that both you find acceptable and a part of becoming community. And peripheral is the idea you start from the outside. So over time, you don't really know your students, they don't really know you, but over time you become closer, you become more central to each other's lives. So I thought these ideas might be interesting and quite connected to your work.
It is very interesting and very different from of what I'm reading, but it is also, that's why it is very interesting. And I guess this will be one of our topics with my students, because they are also interested with this, to explore and speak and talk about this kind of dimension of spaces and places. I mean, in neuronal basis, if I am correct to say, and discuss what are the achievements of neuroscience in this regard, and also perhaps explore some philosophical foundation of this. Thank you for bringing this very interesting dimension. It's interesting, very much.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you. I see a hand raised by Lela Goginava. Please feel free to raise your hands if you have a comment or question. So, Lela?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you, Giorgi, for a fascinating presentation. And I mentioned at the beginning that I was looking forward to this presentation, and I was very curious about the conclusions. So I have two questions. The first one is more philosophical. So what do you think, which one is the priority? Understanding your place in order to define your place in space, or defining your place and becoming aware of space? Another one is directed more to your experiment. What was the most unexpected finding from your experiment for you?
Well, let's begin with the second one. And in the first one, I will need some then repetition to clarify some points. Well, unexpected and also challenging, perhaps. Well, there are some kind of anthropological, so to say, or ethnographic findings, effects which I do not know about, didn't know about India, then I came to know. So there are these kind of facts which are related, but I can't disclose them. It's not so relevant in this regard, but the purely subjective facts which I didn't know. So culturally significant facts, which when I knew them, it enabled me to see in this culture in a more complex way, not in a more simplified way I used to understand Indian culture. So the first unexpected outcome of this was that. And the second was, for example, that I saw that when we opened ourselves, I mean, when I opened myself also to the students and speaking about our vulnerabilities, there were some questions also from students' sides after the sessions. So they were asking about help or suggestions. So different dimensions open. I mean, when we entered this extracurricular environment, when more personal relationships are formed, then you have a different also kind of responsibility, so to say. I don't know. It's a kind of an unexplored territory. So this also was kind of something perhaps unexpected. So I have seen that there are another needs also in students. Some of, I would say, I can't speak due to ethical considerations, I think, but I have seen another dimensions of humanity, how vulnerable we are and how do we need each other to be humans. And this reinforced me even more to keep going and trying to experiment and, going and exploring other places and spaces, and just with doing this and exploring ourselves also. Well, I think this is perhaps incomplete answer anyway. But what was your first question? Or can you repeat it? Please?
So, what do you think? What is the more important? Understanding your place in order to define your place in space, or defining your place and becoming aware of space?
So you're asking what is more important, to find your place
which
in
one
space?
is more important? The first, to define your place in order to define your place in space, or defining your place and become aware of space?
Well, I will move in this direction. So perhaps repeating some points that as an in-place subjects, purely as a physical ones, we always move, we are always place-bounded and move through the spaces, right? But if we go in a more different level, when we speak about belonging, so when I speak about my place at university or my place in a family, this doesn't necessarily also mean my place, the place of my physical body. When I speak about my place at the university or my place in the family, I am speaking about my role. Also, I think mostly, at least in Georgia, we speak about our roles. And this means expectations of others towards me and relationships, and their acknowledgement of myself and my attempts to present myself to them using, Irving Goffman's famous expression of presenting myself in everyday life. So I think that, these are kind of a complex questions. So I will take the turn to my project. What we are trying here, or I am trying, and I am always explicitly saying to students what I am trying, and then sometimes I don't know also in what direction we are moving exactly, but it is that by creating a place where we can talk and we can even chat and sometimes relax, to find ourselves in a different dimension of university community, which today is very accelerated very measurable, so to say, very grant oriented. So we try to pause, to a little bit slow down. And I am also grateful in this regard to a series of events which were organized under the framework of Philosophy and Theory of Higher Education Society in the previous year. The title was Slow Academia, where academics met and we discussed our predicaments, so to say, stresses, and we tried to slow down at least once a month. So this is also something similar, but with students. And so I can say, Lela, that we are trying to create a place and find our place in the place which is university.